In a recent video, I talked about the death of the arcade sports genre and the factors that I believe caused it. But one of my subscribers, shout out to Spiders SCG, left me an interesting comment about sports games in general that did not cross my mind originally. One of his points was that there is a bit of a divide between the hardcore gamers and sports gamers. While I still don't think that this is the biggest reason for the death of arcade sports games, it is certainly a topic that deserves its own video, so that is what I am going to discuss. So anyways, let's start by talking about why some gamers don't like sports games in the first place. The first and most obvious reason is that some people just don't like sports for one reason or another. My brother, for example, doesn't really care about team sports for whatever reason. He did cross country and track and field in middle school and part of his high school years, and even works out regularly, but he never got into football or any other team sport. You don't necessarily have to be a nerd or gamer to dislike sports. There are some people who just don't care about football, basketball, baseball, soccer, or hockey, and aren't into sports but are into other things that aren't video games or computers in general. Some people like reading as a hobby, for example. Some people like hunting and fishing above all else. Some people like making art. So if you're not interested in sports, it's extremely likely that you will not be playing sports video games. Another reason is, like Spiders said, sports represent the normies, i.e. the mainstream. For some gamers, video games represent an escape from society, and to them, sports are a creation of the mainstream. Sports may represent the society that they don't like, and more importantly, some of the people in the real world that they don't like. Maybe most of the people they know in real life that love sports hate video games for one reason or another. A lot of that could be a generational divide if most of the sports fans you know happen to be older folks, or if they got bullied by jocks that played sports in high school, then maybe sports represent those people who treated them badly. I saw some of this divide growing up, but more of the generational divide part of it, and I think this is becoming less and less of a factor as video games have become more socially acceptable. In fact, many of my classmates growing up that did play sports at least played video games casually. I got more flack for being a Nintendo fanboy back then than just being a gamer, to be honest. Mainly because the N64 and GameCube just didn't have the third-party support and got the stigma of being for kids instead of being cool. It wasn't because I just played video games. But what about sports gamers? Obviously, they like both video games and sports, but there's a bit more to it than that. From my experiences, the average sports gamer has always been more of a casual gamer. That's not to say that the average Madden fan, for example, doesn't play other video games, but Madden NFL is something they play when they can't watch football. There's a reason EA releases a new Madden during the preseason in August, because they know their fans have spare time before the regular season begins. Plus, a lot of their gaming is probably a social experience, something to do with their friends. Kinda like how a new Call of Duty game is for a lot of people, something to look forward to with each new game. These gamers don't necessarily care about what's going on in the video game industry. They just want to have a good time with their friends and continue being sports fans, beyond just watching the games on TV and engaging in something like fantasy football. And what I'm saying doesn't just apply to the NFL. What I'm saying applies to NBA 2K fans, as well as fans of what used to be known as the FIFA games, now known as EA Sports FC. Sports game fans tend to be a pretty loyal group overall. That's not to say that there hasn't been some dissatisfaction from, let's say, portions of the Madden fan base over the years, but EA knows that as long as they can deliver a new Madden game every year that's at least functional and doesn't change things up too dramatically, they'll make a ton of money because they have plenty of money to promote it as well as the NFL backing it. I wonder if EA takes these gamers for granted in a lot of ways, but many of these gamers wouldn't care if that was the case. Most of them are not hardcore gamers. They're not looking for an alternative and are mostly happy with what they get, which is familiar gameplay and up-to-date rosters. Now, to some of us, it might seem like these gamers are stuck in what we could call a lifestyle genre. I would actually agree, but it's important to keep in mind that there are other genres that are even more of a lifestyle genre than sports games. A lot of competitive online games are like this, with League of Legends and Dota being great examples. A lot of the more dedicated RPG fans out there don't care that much about other games from other genres. Fighting gamers tend to be pretty locked into their favorite fighting games. See Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 for example. Even some shmup fans are kind of like this from what I've seen in that community. So hardcore gamers can and do get sucked into lifestyle genres, to where that's almost all they play and not much else. Speaking of hardcore gamers, the divide is real between them and sports gamers. Hardcore gamers tend to look at yearly sports games as ridiculous and a waste of money for what should be a simple roster update. It also doesn't help that yearly sports games like Madden and NBA 2K tend to play it safe in terms of keeping the gameplay mostly the same, with some minor changes that may or may not be good. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, some of these more serious gamers are not sports fans to begin with, so personal bias comes into play as well. And because sports gamers tend to be more casual gamers to begin with, that doesn't help either. But the thing is, sports gamers don't really care what you think or what I think. They don't get too carried away with nostalgia for the older games, though they may sometimes express some disappointment with certain aspects of these games today compared to the past. But at the end of the day, they just want to have a good time with the latest rosters and play as their favorite teams and favorite players. These established franchises are still providing that. And as someone who identifies as a hardcore gamer myself, but also enjoys sports like the NFL, I actually used to fall into this mindset of thinking that sports gamers were a bunch of sheep that were bad for gaming. I used to look down upon the people who would line up at GameStop many years ago just to pick up the latest Madden that they had pre-ordered. I thought that they were suckers. I was also pretty mad that there weren't any real alternatives like NFL Blitz or Sega's NFL 2K games anymore. But eventually I went back and played some Madden NFL 2005 and Dolphin, and I realized that this is actually a pretty well made game with a lot of content. I could see why the series did really well back in Generation 6, and why people got hooked on these games and are loyal to the series even today. They were actually trying to add new mechanics back then, like the hit stick, that was pretty cool, and they were trying to make it to where you couldn't just run all day with Michael Vick. While I'm not too impressed with what I've seen from the newer Madden games in terms of gameplay, lack of modes compared to previous generations, as well as the graphics not being as cutting edge compared to how the Generation 6 games felt, the real problem here is the lack of competition. The average Madden fan is not my enemy. The exclusivity deals established in large part by the league executives are, as well as the current state of the gaming industry. I believe there is room for more than one NFL game, more than one NBA game, or more than one NHL game. But that's not what we're getting for the most part, and looking down upon sports gamers is not going to help bring back competition either. The sad thing is that the death of the arcade sports game probably made this divide even bigger. Arcade sports games had appeal well beyond the average sports gamer. My brother, who would never play a basketball sim like the NBA 2K or NBA Live games back in the day, loved playing NBA Jam and NBA Hang Time. It helped that these games often didn't need a whole lot of buttons to play. NBA Jam and the early NFL Blitz games only needed 3 buttons. Tecmo Bowl only needed 2. Sensible Soccer only needed 1, and that was on the Amiga and DOS back in the day. Even people who didn't like sports could learn the basics of these games. But as I explained in my video about the death of the arcade sports game, those options are not really there anymore, at least for newer games. I think a great arcade sports game could succeed in uniting the more casual sports gamers as well as the hardcore gamers, but I don't think we'll see that anytime soon, sadly. But anyways, the divide is real. It's probably not going away anytime soon, but I think gamers of all types need to interact with each other more and not just stay in their own little bubbles. The more we can do that instead of being in our own echo chambers, the better off we're gonna be. But now, I want to know what you think. Are you a big fan of sports games or do you hate them? Are you a hardcore gamer that happens to like sports as well, like I am? Or do you hate sports in general? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.